coming back.
Okay, well, the NBA has a plan in place to return at the end of July, and they're doing all their games in Florida, which is daily setting new records for COVID cases.
So good. This is going to end so great.
I don't know what the NHL is doing. Cameron might be able to better answer that question.
There's two hub cities, Toronto and Las Vegas. They're gonna play their games both in both cities. As far as terms of COVID, no news is good news for the NHL players. I know MLB is having the toughest time. Personally, I don't think it happens.
No, I don't think it happens, and I'm actually kind of okay with. As much as I want baseball so bad, I'm like dying for baseball. Their collective bargaining agreement ends after next year, and they are no close to any kind of deal. And I think if they could spend the extra time actually hammering out a plan for it, because the current collective bargaining agreement just fucks the players hardcore.
It does, and they're asking to like the owners want them to take a pay cut. It's like just. I have a gripe with billionaires telling millionaires to take a pay cut.
Seriously.
It's like,
yeah, those billionaires don't actually really contribute to the sport the way the athletes do.
No, and majority of players make only six figures. So you're asking these players on six figures to take to have their pay decreased by 20%. That's a lot.
Yeah, not to mention the way that the owners are just fucking the minor leagues. I mean, they already fucked them by paying them, like, legally are allowed to pay minor league players less than minimum wage.
Christ.
And they're already fucking with them. They're cutting teams. They're making it harder for there are certain players who just aren't going to get that chance now, and it just sucks. And it just reminds me that the people who own the teams now are they're not fans. Or at least they're not fans anymore. They're just, they're like, I remember somebody a long time ago saying that owning a sports team is the new owning a yacht for billionaires.
It's just another toy.
Yeah, that makes sense, unfortunately.
And Bernie Sanders fought to help preserve minor league baseball too.
Oof. Yeah, I mean, in the MMA world, I will say that a lot of the owners are fans of the sport, but that certainly doesn't stop them from paying the fighters just absolute scraps.
Really, how you get paid in MMA is to talk a lot and be subpar in your ability, and it's more like theatrics. It's like WWE. Someone like Nate Diaz can draw more money from a fight than someone who's skilled but not as much of a showman. And McGregor as well. So it's almost like you get paid more money to be a showman rather than an actual fighter. I feel like that's where it's going now.
Yeah, I agree. Although even I would have a little less of a problem with that if the lower tier fighters, and even the fighters that are good but like you said, not the best at drawing attention to themselves, if they were paid better, then sure, give a little bit more to the showman. But
yeah,
the amount of profits that go to the fighters, even compared to just other major sports like baseball, basketball, and football, it's nothing. It's shameful, really.
Yeah.
And then the NFL is just going to come back. They don't give a shit. The NFL, though, is the only sport, I think, the only league. NBA is probably right around there, but the NFL is the only sport I think that can make every single mistake, every wrong move along the way and not lose a single bit of popularity.
It's the most lucrative sport in America.
Yeah. You know what's the craziest sport in America, though?
What?
Politics.
God.
Got 'em.
That's it. Yeah. That's the ultimate team sport right there.
I don't know if we can segue from that one. So let's just dive right into it. All right, everybody. Welcome back to A Mouthful of History. It's been a little while.
A little while, just a smidge.
Yeah,
As always, I am your host, Nicholas Malott. Joined with me David Hollingsworth.
Hey everyone, good to I was gonna say good to see you again, but really you're only hearing us and we're not seeing each other. But it's good to be in some form of contact.
And Cameron Millage.
Let's get this party started, gentlemen.
All right, let's get this bread.
We wouldn't normally do 2 movie reviews in a row. We like to the movie reviews either as like something special or just like, you know, after a few episodes of a break. But we had to move some schedules around. Some stuff happened. Nothing serious. We're fine, I think.
We're good.
But because of that, you'll actually be getting a lot more content from us soon, at least the next 2 episodes. Just to get us back in this movie, we thought we'd just do another movie review because it's quick. It's easy.
This is our easy day.
For those of you listening, basically for our first movie episode, we had done a poll. And we asked people to choose between Dunkirk, Lincoln, and 1917. And Dunkirk, I think it was on our Facebook poll, won out by a little bit over Lincoln. And then on Twitter, just won by a huge margin. But 1917 actually received 0 votes. So
it got a single vote on Instagram.
Oh wow, I stand corrected. Okay, yeah, right. So we also did it on Instagram. 1917 between all 3 platforms that we asked about received 1 vote. Dunkirk was the clear winner, but Lincoln was still kind of competitive in the poll. And
yeah,
so
it made a comeback towards the end.
Yeah, it did start making a little bit of a comeback, you know. It started catching up. Dunkirk still won. We decided to do a second movie episode. Figured we'd go with what the people wanted. We did kind of realize as we were like gearing up right now that something like Selma probably would have been a better choice. But, you know, this definitely isn't the last movie episode we're going to do. And talking about stuff like Selma is definitely going to come sooner than later.
Oh, yeah. Selma's going to be great on MLK Jr.'s birthday next year.
After the Sonic movie.
The ultimate historical
film.
Obviously, just the basics. Lincoln tells the story of the last 4 months of the life and presidency of Abraham Lincoln. Obviously, towards the end of the Civil War and his attempts to get the 13th Amendment passed through Congress during the lame duck section. It actually tells the story in 2 parts. Lincoln's stuff and the congressional stuff. The congressional stuff is actually a sometimes more enjoyable part of the movie, but we'll get to that. I also think Lincoln allows us to talk about something that will come up later as we do more of these, and that's how incredibly black and white I think our media and I think us the whole by extension try to paint historical figures.
Oh yeah, and it kind of puts into the framework that so-and-so is a 100% good guy, and this other historical figure is 100% bad guy. It's like you have to pick either or. There's no gray area in between.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's nice to be able to go into just sort of, starting with a matter-of-fact way of looking at someone, and then drawing judgments for the good and bad, and looking at all these little interesting historical wrinkles. I don't know about y'all, but I'm thinking it might be cool to talk about the movie like as a movie and then delve into the history. What do y'all think?
Yeah, so let's just do a quick look at the movie. It actually starts off, interestingly enough, Lincoln visiting soldiers, being talked to by 2 black soldiers, who one of them, played by David Oleo, I'm sorry for butchering that name. I don't mean to. Kind of the theme of the movie, the push for, I don't want to say equality because obviously the 13th Amendment didn't lead to equality, but something resembling equality.
Yeah, at least emancipation from being enslaved.
Yeah.
First stepping stone.
Yeah. And then it kind of leans into Lincoln is pushing the 13th Amendment, abolishment of slavery in Congress. So what's interesting is, as the movie points out, this is during the lame duck session, and the Republicans not just Lincoln winning re-election in 1864, but the Republicans cleaned up in that election too, and they were going to come in with enough votes to pass it by themselves.
Because fuck Confederate ancestry.
Yeah.
Really?
The parts of the movie that delve with Congress tend to focus around Thaddeus Stevens, who's played brilliantly by Tommy Lee Jones. Gosh, man. Sometimes I confuse him and Harrison Ford, not because I think they look the same, because they obviously don't, but for some reason their names always get crossed in my head.
I have a couple celebrities like that too, where like they're not in any way similar, but for some reason I just mix up their names.
Thaddeus Stevens is, again, underrated political figures in American history, and somebody who was, after this period, very vilified in U.S. history. In fact, a likeness of him is the main antagonist of Birth of a Nation.
Sounds about right. Yeah, and one thing that's really cool about the historical figure of Thaddeus Stevens that this movie does actually kind of hint toward is that his vision of freedom for African Americans and just like people of color in general, although the main group of color at the time in the U.S. were Black folks, is that freedom goes just beyond like theoretical political rights, but it also goes to economic freedom and different rights. So, for example, Thaddeus Stevens was an advocate of land and resource distribution or redistribution to freed people of color. And so his conception of freedom went beyond just abolishing slavery. But because of that, he was very looked down upon and vilified, like you were just talking about.
Yeah, he is the radical of the radical Republicans, which for anybody out there who will listen to this and gets a little confused by the fact that the Republicans are the good guys in this story, David, you want to give a quick overview of political realignment?
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so I guess to start with what the Republicans and Democrats were, they didn't have like the most defined ideology per se. So I think from the time, it's better to think of them more regionally than like ideologically. But basically, the Republicans were based in the North. The Democrats were based in the South. Things get a little bit murkier in the West because the divide isn't quite as even, but it's still, generally like Republicans are popular generally in anti-slavery areas, Democrats popular in pro-slavery areas. And of course, with the split of the Confederacy, a lot of the Democrats or the areas that were Democrat controlled were broken away from the country. And so that's a large part of why the Republicans had such a strong foothold during this time.
The Republicans and the ones who ended up being elected in the West tended to be a little bit more conservative than their Northeastern counterparts.
Yeah, and definitely like this is a good time also to explain just briefly the difference between like the radical Republicans and the conservative Republicans, which the movie kind of touches on. The radical Republicans were basically Republicans that were based in an ideology of like land distribution, abolition of slavery, even like most of them were also in favor of women voting, generally kind of like leaned pro-labor, pro-civil liberties, stuff like that, whereas the conservative Republicans were
more pro-business.
Yeah, pro-business and in favor of like political equality, but not any sort of like radical redistribution or reimagining of U.S. society.
Yeah, they actually came to Lincoln in the 1860 election because he was a compromise. While Lincoln, as far as his writing, as he would state, personally despised the institution of slavery, he would, I don't think, ever go as far as full equality. In fact, we know that Lincoln would never go as far as full equality. The historical Lincoln, that is.
Yeah.
Actually, Cameron and I took a Civil War class taught by a very well-read Lincoln historian, and that was great.
He had the last surviving photo of Abraham Lincoln. Was it in his coffin?
Yeah.
It was after his burial, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the stops made along his tour when they were taking him to be buried.
I'm from Pella, Iowa.
He was great.
Professor Rietveld. Good man. But reading 9 books, oh my God. That was a class and a half, but I loved it.
I got an A. I didn't pick up a single book.
That's like a graduate seminar.
I mean, our professor was old school, but it was a good kind of old school.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so back to the movie. So Thaddeus Stevens kind of is the main focus of the Congress part of the story, and of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, who plays Lincoln. And what is probably a top 5 role for Daniel Day-Lewis? I go far as to say top 2, personally. But
what's the other one? There Will Be Blood?
Daniel Plainview. Yeah,
What?
There Will Be Blood.
There Will Be Blood.
I would like to imagine that with Daniel Day-Lewis being such a method actor that like he just went to a part of the world where there's like a civil war and became a president and just like ended the civil war there just so he could like get his method acting in before playing as Lincoln.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean,
Not out of the room.
he would have done that. He would have done that.
Right?
Okay, so any comments you guys want to make about the movie in general, away from its plot?
It felt like Darkest Hour a little bit, and it had that like sort of like political drama. It felt like shades of that film, like Gary Oldman as
Just a little
Winston
less
Churchill.
boring.
A little less boring, but it had that sort of political drama about it. Especially like when like you hear about the news from like the battlefields.
Yeah.
It's like very much that purely political sense to it.
I never saw Darkest Hour, but I could definitely, just from the trailers, I could see that. Also, of course, side note, fuck Winston Churchill. But yeah, I mean, I guess my like biggest thing is that Daniel Day-Lewis and Tommy Lee Jones just did incredible in their roles. I mean, I know we kind of already said that, but they did a really good job, and yet a lot of people do a good job in this movie. Fucking so many famous people are in this movie, and I kind of forgot until I rewatched it.
Fucking Kylo Ren playing a lowly messenger boy.
Samuel Beckwith.
Yep. And of course, Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Playing Robert Lincoln.
Sally Field. We're forgetting Sally Field.
I know I already made an Oscar point in our Dunkirk, but I'm going to say it again. There was no fucking place on Earth or in any alternate Earth where Sally Field should have lost Best Supporting Actress to fucking Anne Hathaway. Anne Hathaway was in her movie for 10 minutes, sung one crappy version of an overrated musical song, and got her Oscar. That's bullshit. That should have been... What?
Which movie was she in?
Les Mis.
Okay.
That's a strong one. That's a strong movie, right?
It should have been Sally Field. Everyone knows it. I've been telling everybody this for now 8 years. It should have been Sally Field.
I'll definitely sign on to that hot take.
She was fantastic.
I will sign on to that too.
She was fantastic as Mary Todd Lincoln, portraying her as wounded, still not recovered from the death of her son, just driven off a cliff by what she feels is Lincoln's indifference to this whole situation, that she is clearly a little mentally unstable, which, as we know, historically, Mary Todd Lincoln was a little mentally unstable towards the end of her life. She handles her well, but you never feel like she's hamming it up. It's all heart when she's there.
I mean, according to Sally Field, we really like her. We really, really like her.
I could make an argument for Tommy Lee Jones winning Best Supporting Actor, which I thought he was going to win, but he didn't, and I'm not going to complain about who did win.
But I am seeing in my screen a plug for John Williams. That is not coincidence. That is planned.
Going back to Tommy Lee Jones, though, my favorite scene in the entire movie is when the opposition to the 13th Amendment is trying to basically rile up Thaddeus Stevens and trying to get him to admit that he wants full equality for people of color as opposed to just abolishing slavery, so that they can then undermine the 13th Amendment and say it's a stepping stone to full equality, which, oh man, so terrible. Anyway, they're trying to goad him into saying he believes in full equality. And so in that scene, they're like trying to back him into that corner, but he's trying to kind of just like stay low key so that he doesn't, ruin the movement that's going on and like not get the 13th Amendment through. And so the guy trying to grill him is like, oh, but you believe in full equality and that all people are created equal, don't you? And Thaddeus Stevens is just like, dude, you're such a fucking idiot that there's no way I can possibly believe that all people are created equal because you suck so fucking much. And then the guy just like doesn't know what to say and just like fucking slumps out of the room. I love that part.
The mic drop moment.
I love that. I love the overdramatic 19th century. How dare you? When he says that.
How dare you, sir?
Fucking roasted.
Yeah, that's great.
You are a scallywag. Get out of my room.
And then he goes on, like, his fellow cohort, like, admonishes him back there. He's like, everything you've ever stood for, you threw it down, you slapped it in the face, and he has to explain to him, I want slavery gone, I want equality. So yeah, there's nothing I won't say to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, hard to argue with.
basically summing up Stevens. Stevens was able to play politics just enough for it to play out the way he wanted it to.
Yeah, man. Other than that, like, I think it's a little difficult to talk about this movie more in depth because Steven Spielberg's greatest strength is that he's so good at the basics of filmmaking, and he's so good at filling everything with like interesting drama and wonder and everything, but he does it in such a like way where he's mastered the basics, and so he's not putting any fancy stuff in there, and so it makes it a little difficult to analyze because it's like he just knows his ABCs really, really well, and he always dots his I's and crosses his T's.
Yeah, it's also Lincoln has been described as one of the most historically accurate Hollywood films ever made. And that's probably not a mistake that it was a Spielberg film that did that, because that's just, and it's not even the first time Spielberg's handled these kind of topics before.
Schindler's List is one of them. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, like in terms of historical issues, yeah.
Yeah, Spielberg's probably one of the few directors who can take historicals. Like, yeah, we'll put some stuff where we need to, but I think the historical stuff is drama enough. Oh, and yeah, before we move on to talking about some of the historical parts to it. Yeah, John Williams' score is fantastic. It's a lot more low-key than you're kind of used to when it comes to Williams stuff, but it plays just fine. It captures the mood just perfectly.
It's enough for you to wear that shirt, though.
I got this at a concert, a John Williams concert. So
was it like the Philharmonic, the Star Wars like thing?
Yeah, but they did a whole medley of his stuff from other movies.
Yeah, I see that big ball and a hole in it on your shirt.
Okay, so I think
Death Star.
I think that's a good talking about the movies. Let's get into some historical stuff. I think the first one and the most important thing is that when confronting Lincoln, there's a lot of things like we said about Abraham Lincoln, but he's often referred to as the great emancipator, and that's just not true of the historical Lincoln. Lincoln ended slavery. Like I said, there's enough evidence to show that Lincoln was disgusted by the institution of slavery, but didn't believe in true equality. This movie kind of captures that because Daniel Day-Lewis as Lincoln always seems to dodge or say something kind of fluffy about equality instead of just actually confronting. In fact, the only time where equality is ever really brought up is in the only one-on-one between Stevens and Lincoln, and Lincoln basically tells him, I don't agree with your vision of Reconstruction.
Well, yeah. Lincoln was never really a full-on abolitionist, you know. He, in his letters, he'd say, if I can save the Union without freeing the slaves, I would. And that's a very big statement that we don't get taught in public school. We don't speak about the John Browns of the 1800s. Like, yeah. we talk about Lincoln as the great emancipator. Of course, I mean, he's the president, Emancipation Proclamation, but he did that out of circumstance. He wanted to cut the life's blood of the Confederacy in terms of manpower away, and just we have to put Lincoln in his proper belief system. Like, he never was an abolitionist. He knew slavery was morally wrong, but he didn't want to upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think another thing that one thing that I understand from my studies that this movie gets wrong is it kind of paints Lincoln as the central figure. And of course, he's obviously very important. And as we were just talking about, you know, he did do a lot. But a big part of why the 13th Amendment got to where it was is because enslaved and formerly enslaved people were pushing for this, you know? I mean, it was a lot of slave rebellions and even just more passive forms of resistance from enslaved people and formerly enslaved people that kind of kept bringing the question of slavery into the public debate. And even in the present, whenever there is resistance and grassroots movement that forces a question into the public, like debate and consciousness, that's going to kind of get some wheels turning around those issues. And so part of the reason that slavery did become such a big issue is that Black folks were like forcing it to be an issue. And so I think that, you know, it's obviously not reasonable to expect this movie to like have simultaneously been about Lincoln and like the full context of Black resistance that like led to this. But I think a good thing that this movie could have done might have been to have like Frederick Douglass giving speeches around the nation kind of in the background of the movie, just to show that there was a lot of things going on around that was like pushing things forward, that wasn't just Lincoln politic and Thaddeus Stevens like arguing in the halls of
We could also sprinkle in some Harriet Tubman too.
yeah,
The Underground
absolutely.
Railroads, like have that like in passing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the movie has a disturbingly for a movie whose central purpose is the end of slavery, a disturbing lack of black people in the movie.
Yep. Also, real quick side notes: do either of you know where the 13th Amendment actually originated from?
Ooh,
I had no idea until I was doing some research.
I didn't.
I didn't. I know that they mentioned in the movie that it had been defeated, so I know that it existed well before that. So go ahead, David.
So the 13th Amendment actually, the one that ended up passing, actually originated from a petition campaign in 1864 by the Women's Loyal National League, which was a women's political organization. And this was back then, abolitionists and people in favor of like women's suffrage were very closely linked. Those movements often went hand in hand. So it was the Women's Loyal National League, which included members like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, that actually created the groundswell for the 13th Amendment. I mean, again, it was the organization of Black folks that brought the question into the public, but then it was that organization that specifically brought about the 13th Amendment as an amendment going through Congress into being.
That's really cool. It actually goes to show you how much grassroots movements plays a part in the stuff that the politics of it gets all the sexy airtime.
Yep.
Like, oh, look how he's talking on that floor. Look how he's so sophisticated. It's like, no, you get on the street, you protest, you fight.
And I think it's sometimes when we parse through like what is or isn't historically accurate in movies, the question is kind of like, okay, but why is it important whether or not something is or isn't accurate? Because, I'm sure there's other things that weren't accurate in the movie that don't really matter. But I think what's really important about talking about like these grassroots movement from people of color, resisting the conditions that they're forced into, to the Women's Loyal National League driving the creation of the 13th Amendment, is that an unfortunate way that we have of understanding politics is that it happens in debates in the halls of Congress and not on the streets. And, that's something that a lot of people have talked about in regard to shows like The West Wing, which is like a good show. Like, you shouldn't feel bad about liking it or anything, but it plays into this assumption of politics that's really especially taken hold since the end of World War II, really, which is this idea that like politics happens at the ballot box and in the halls of Congress. And other than maybe the civil rights movements, it's not really looked at as like a struggle between people on the ground trying to exert their voice and exert resistance to the status quo to achieve political ends. And so, this movie kind of reflects that ideology, which, to be clear, I don't think is like some conspiracy or anything. I just think that's how like we are taught to understand politics, and that's how like even some like historians might understand politics, because it's like a self-perpetuating ideology that's just kind of like easier to digest.
Even Schoolhouse Rock tells us.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, just like most if not all the positive change in this country has come from grassroots movements. When you have politicians that are looking out for other things, they don't have the best interest of the people at heart. And they're put in a position where they have to pass these things. If you look today, like all the positive legislation's getting through, it's like people are out in the streets fighting for it. You know what I mean? Like, that's
let's take a look at Minneapolis, for example, just to bring it back to the present real quick. How many decades of voting for like local Democrats has kind of led to inertia and getting things done locally? But a couple of weeks of uprising and they're gonna abolish the freaking police over there. That's incredible.
No, it is incredible. It's unprecedented.
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's absolutely fantastic, and it does go to show that stuff like this, a movie trying to talk about history in Hollywood, some of those concepts need to be simplified for people to fully understand it.
Yeah.
And that's why I go back to the idea that, like, I don't necessarily think you need to, like, radically change this movie or anything like that. Just having, like, again, like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman kind of doing their thing parallel to what's going on might have been like a nice flourish to help things be both a little bit more accurate and also, like you said, Nick, give a little bit more agency to the black characters.
Yeah, it was missing that. It's because it's funny because the movie is based on the book Team of Rivals, which focuses on Lincoln's how he formed his cabinet. Funny enough, a book based on that, it doesn't really focus in on too much of that. And in fact, the Civil War, even though we know what's going on, is almost kind of background noise in the movie. You would think that, oh, well, we're not talking about the South, we're just talking about this. There are parts of the whole story in terms of the 13th Amendment, in terms of slavery, in terms of all this stuff that just at times seem to be missing that, again, is simplified for the sake of a movie audience, but kind of unnecessarily makes the story seem like it was just Lincoln and the radical Republicans.
Yeah. Yeah, and fun fact about all that. And the thing I'm about to say actually, like, it's not something I at all fault the movie for or think really needs to be changed in any way because it makes it more interesting. But also the 13th Amendment, because of all these forces in the country pushing against slavery, the 13th Amendment was going to eventually pass anyway. There wasn't like a ticking clock deadline the way the movie kind of implies, but I totally get why they added that ticking clock. It just adds more drama and makes it more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, they even say it themselves. Like, it's going to get defeated, and then in a few months you're going to have a basically idiot-proof majority to pass it anyway. So it really wouldn't have mattered anyway. It does briefly touch on Lincoln meeting with the delegation from the South and how he basically, that's the moment where he tells them, slavery, it's done. You're going to come back. This is going to be a brave new world, and you're just going to have to suck it, which is good. But it also highlights the last thing I really want to talk about in terms of things that the movie highlights historically that actually I think it does to its benefit, but also helps shine a light on the problems of Abraham Lincoln, the historical person, and that Lincoln's way too willingness to be soft on the Confederacy. He doesn't want to punish. He just wants things to return to normal. It's almost as he's a person, it seems anyway, who thought that after everything that just happened, we could just come back together like that and everything would be fine. Like I said, to the movie's credit, it points that out. And it actually, this is going to sound so fucked up, but the best thing Abraham Lincoln did to his legacy is die before he had a chance to ruin it by going with soft Reconstruction. His plan for Reconstruction was not so different from the one Andrew Johnson was going to put into effect.
Yeah, that's a fair point. But then he would have also had more political capital than Andrew Johnson. So, yeah, he probably would have been harder to, like, push back against than Andrew Johnson. So Reconstruction as we know it might not have happened. That's a really good point. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, I think Lincoln would have never done any form of radical Reconstruction. I think if you just look at some of those incidents before the Civil War and during the Civil War, it was never going to happen. Biggest example was remember the Fremont incident where John C. Fremont tried freeing the slaves in Missouri?
Yeah.
And Lincoln's like, don't you fucking do that, Fremont. Don't you do that. I think it's where his head was. I just don't think that it would have been Charmin soft. Like,
yeah, and Lincoln, like I said, movies like this really help to highlight how when we talk about historical people and how they're portrayed in the media, it focuses around this need to paint everyone as good guys and bad guys. And Lincoln, widely considered our greatest president, to be fair, there's only been like 5 or 6 great ones, even any grading on the curve that we have to grade presidents on.
Or the so low bar we set.
Yeah. He's not the out-and-out bad guy that I think the modern left tries to portray him as, or some of the modern left, I should say. But he's also not the saint that I think history has portrayed him as.
Yeah, I think he deserves credit for being able to guide everything through the Civil War, and to his credit also, like, taking the 13th Amendment seriously. But then, of course, you know, having very severe limits to his politics beyond that. I think he's kind of what the moment called for. But I mean, shit, man, I'll take Ulysses S. Grant over Lincoln, honestly.
I just think that we have such a whitewashed view of Abraham Lincoln. Again, like we see, like, oh, he freed the slaves. That's it. That's done. Slavery's over. like Lincoln.
Fix
It's like
racism.
we have such a, I would even say, an infantile view of Abraham Lincoln. Very infantile. This is what we know. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Like he was on the side of the Union. But it doesn't go into any more nuance. It's like white people quoting Martin Luther King. It's really what it comes down to. Like we have such a whitewashed, American-washed image of these people. We don't really get down into the nuances of these kinds of characters.
Oh, no, we don't. And this movie does try to with Lincoln a little bit. Like I said, it portrays him not as this overly confident, know what he's doing and is doing the right thing character, but portrays him more as the conflicted person that he is. Kind of dances around his true beliefs when it comes to equality and stuff like that.
Just like the real Lincoln did.
Just like the real Lincoln did.
I mean,
So I guess that's...
The Civil War was such a stressful time, too. You know, it's like one of the most stressful points in American history.
Yeah, it is still the most volatile moment in American history.
But then it's like, we have like the Civil War. Or like the Roman Empire had like a Civil War every weekend. it's like we have it's the Civil War. But it's like, Rome. Oh, is that Civil War in that corner over there? Oh, yeah. Wait for next weekend. We'll wait to participate in that one.
Yeah, within the previous 200 years, the English had 2 civil wars.
Yeah. I mean, fucking hell.
And I do thank this movie, too, for treating Thaddeus Stevens with the respect a character like him deserves. He, for too long, had been mistreated by history as somebody who tried to push equality on a poor white populace because, you know, they couldn't handle it.
Agreed.
It's like John Brown.
Yeah.
The only white man in the 18th century there's a statue is John fucking Brown.
Replace all those Confederate statues with John Brown statues.
Yeah, let's just put John Brown in every state.
It's funny, Seward, who's as in the movie as much as Lincoln, because he's almost always by Lincoln's side, and actually one of the original Republicans, like he goes back to 1856, I believe. He's actually closer in ideology to the radicals than he was the more moderate Lincoln.
I kind of got that impression just based from the movie, but I wasn't sure how accurate it was.
He was actually Lincoln's chief competition during the Republican National Convention during 1860.
Huh.
But there was no way the Republicans were going to allow a radical to be president.
Yeah, well, the thing is, radical Republicans made what, less than 10% of the party overall?
Yeah.
So it was such a small fraction.
You're right. The movie does a good job of showing that Lincoln was not a perfect person. He just happened to be the right person for the moment. And sometimes in history, when you're analyzing history, the best people aren't always the ones who end up in charge. They're just the ones who answer the call at the right time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's fair.
They should make a movie about General Sherman next.
Oh, yeah. Just a Tarantino 2-hour film of him just wiping out the South.
Like Tarantino, Michael Bay combo. Because, you know, Michael Bay is all about those explosions.
And then there can be like a buddy cop thing where like Sherman is just like wrecking the shit out of everyone or all the Confederates Tarantino style and just like loving it. And then Grant is also there and he's like, you know, he's just this great mind, but he hates the sight of blood. And so he just sees everything happening. He's just super uncomfortable. He is the by the book character of any buddy cop movie where Sherman is just the loose cannon.
Burn this down.
Any final thoughts, guys?
Well, I think Abraham Lincoln, not just in the movie, but like just in general, was like one of the most like, I wouldn't say enigmatic, but I would say is one of the big figures in history in terms of mainstream to not be as analyzed, as like less in depth than we probably should dissect him. And the movie does paint him as like this guy in a stressful situation, just trying to figure out what's best for the Union. I find that there's more gray area to Lincoln. And I think, I mean, a movie's never going to solve that, but I think we should put Lincoln's history under the microscope.
Yes, I agree. David?
I think this is a very good movie. I think you should watch it, and then after you watch it, read the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. It's very short and very easy to read, written by the man himself. And then after that, just maybe watch a couple of videos or read. I mean, it's a little bit after what we're talking about, but read W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, and just kind of like watch Lincoln, enjoy it for what it is, and even pay attention to how it like portrays history. And then study some other sources, including like Black authors and historians and stuff, and just kind of see what they all have to say and give yourself a well-rounded bird's eye view.
I'd say Lincoln is a really good movie. I think on the second tier of 2010 films, I still enjoy it. But yeah, watch it for what it is, and then go find out more about Lincoln, the person, so that you understand who he is. Because it's just, there's so much trying to put a sainthood on Lincoln that's not true, and it does no service to him, and it does nothing to help us fully understand our history. Honestly, doing that cheapens the Black experience for Americans, especially at that time.
Agreed.
I mean, American history has always been known for swiping the shit under the rug. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And to be fair, I that's super true. But yeah, I feel like every society does it. But when we have so much deep problems, we got to confront our shit.
Yeah.
Okay, so couple house cleaning items before we take off. The next episode, guys, you guys want to let them know what the next episode's going to be for realsies this time?
So this next episode, we are going to be dissecting the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. So Dien Bien Phu was a decisive battle in the French Indochina War, or as we like to call it, the other Vietnam War, or the first Vietnam War. What we're going to do is we're going to run down the context of the battle, the history of why the French were in Vietnam, formation of the Communist Party, World War II. We're going to get into the battle itself, why it was so decisive, and finally, we're going to talk about the Geneva Conference and the significance of it and the U.S.'s role in making the Vietnam War we talk about today.
That sounds good. Now, I am going to change up my original plan for what I wanted to do because something caught my attention in the last few days, and I think it's worth discussing with you guys. I think that's a better understanding of another major historical figure this time of the 20th century, and that's Lenin.
V.I. Lenin.
I'm starting to realize that people don't know him or his thoughts as well, and I think they sometimes try to compare Lenin and Stalin like comparable figures, and they're not.
Yeah, or they just lump Lenin as a mass murderer.
Also, Americans know shit about Russian history, and they like to talk smack about the country. So
well, they move the goalposts all the time. But no, it's just like we have a very infantile view of Russia.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode. We look forward to talking with you guys, hearing you guys. Again, if you have episode suggestions, you can reach us at amouthfulhistory@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on our Facebook or Twitter at amouthfulofhis1.
And on our Instagram page, if you are willing to slide into our DMs.
Again, a special shout out to Caroline for putting us together, making us sound a lot better than we have any right to be.
Yes, the real MVP of it all.
Yep.
And thank you all for listening. We're already 6 episodes in, and I thought we would get discouraged and end after 3 episodes, so I'm happy we've gotten this far.
For the love of the game.
All right, till next time.
Till next time.
See
Thanks,
ya.
everyone.